Hello, hi. First of all, I would like to apologize. I can't attend the conference in person because of some unavoidable reasons. However, what I'm going to be doing today is I'm going to share with you a lecture which is not part of my research, which I normally do, but rather I'm going to share with you something which I have been reading quite extensively now, and which I found very interesting. There's, how would you say, controversy or discussion rather on whether can aging be called a disease. Okay, so in the first place, what is aging? um, we kind of get confused and say aging is when you're 60 years and above, or when you're 65 years and above. And I was also reading about the cutoff age of aging, and there's elderly and there's young elderly, very old. Well, this will never end, I guess. Um, but what actually is aging? We're not talking about chronological age, when you reach a certain birthday and that's your age. It's more than that. Well, there are, interestingly, if you would search, and you'll find that there are so many definitions of aging. I'm just going to mention two here. They're basically about the same thing. One is from this evolutionary biology of aging from Oxford University Press by Rose. Defines as a persistent decline in the age-specific fitness components of an organism due to internal physiological deterioration. Well, basically, it means that internally, when there is a physiological, not pathological, physiological, normal change in deterioration, and that's what defines as aging. The other one is aging, which is a progressive physiological changes in an organism that lead to senescence or a decline of biological function and of the organism's ability to adapt to metabolic stress. Here, senescence is very interesting. I'm going to be talking a lot about this in the next slides to come because I found that to be the most persistently and consistently spoken about in when we read about aging. Cells in our body are consistently dividing. Senescence means that what happens is your cells actually stop growing, stop dividing. Why? Well, this is part of the aging process that happens is that because of stresses, it can be environmental stress, it can be just even your emotional stress that will cause these cells to become senescent. Well, basically they are there but they're not functioning. I've read somewhere that they're called zombie cells. I find it very interesting. So they are there but they are not doing what they're supposed to do. So this will drive aging, and what will happen is that it will cause loss of functionality. And because of this senescence, studies have showed that a lot of diseases like type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular diseases, non-alcoholic fatty diseases, renal dysfunction, fibrosis, to name a few, is because of senescence. So what happens is that they stop dividing, they stop growing, they're just there like zombies, and basically they're damaged. So they're unable to function as they should be, and that causes loss of function and causes morbidity. So if you would search for what are the theories of aging, what actually causes aging, what are the reasons for aging, you'll find so many there. It's amazing. These are few that I've read and amazing, but they don't actually answer the whole spectrum and complexity of aging. There's a program longevity, endocrine theory, immunological theory, wear and tear theory, rate of oxygen theory, cross-linking theory, free radicals theory, disengagement theory, activity theory, the membrane theory of aging, the decline theory. Basically, just the names alone, I think you will understand. You're talking about how long your cells actually have been programmed and what would accelerate those cells um, to deteriorate and eventually cause aging. We won't go through all this. It's just too much detail, I think, for this talk. We'll touch on something which I find interesting. We all know about free radicals. It's just like your machines which function poorly after some time because of rust and dust and accumulation of carbons and so on and so forth, cause your machines to be less effective. The same thing with your body cells. This what we call free radicals. They destruct and destroy our damage our body cells, and this damages specifically to the mitochondria. And this, well, this is the most common the belief, which I think for me at least is something which I understand, which promotes aging. Now, when you talk about aging, I mentioned earlier about chronological age is that just not aging. We have easily we talk about COVID, for example. We do know that COVID, the main risk for morbidity and severe morbidity and mortality is age. The older you are, the higher risk it is. But then we have this cutoff point about 60. I was talking to someone recently who was very interesting. He says, thank God I'm 59, if I was 60, I would be at higher risk. And I was just smiling to myself and wondering, what if my birthday is tomorrow and today I'm 59, so I'm still okay until tomorrow? Well, chronological age and biological age we usually get confused with. If we look at that figure, I'm sure everybody knows what it is. This is strands made of lipids and proteins and form the double helix. And this is what we call the DNA. Now, the protective caps that you see on top, those are the telomeres. Now, again, the damage to the telomeres due to the oxidative stress, this results in aging. But what is interesting is that you can measure your biological age. Now, this is the true measure of your age, your biological age. You know, someone sent me a nice joke yesterday. It was about this person looks at this lady and she looks like about 80 years old, and asks her what is, how are you able to live so long? And she says that, well, I drink as much as I want, I eat whatever I want, I sleep late, I really don't care about all this healthy eating and stuff. And he goes, wow, that's very impressive. He says, yeah, look at me, and I'm right age of 40. So you see, that's her biological age does not show her chronological age. So how do you measure biological age? Well, now you can actually measure biological age. It's quite pretty easy. Still, well, maybe not as cheap as it is in some of the Western countries. And by measuring the telomeres. They do studies on telomeres and can tell you what's your biological age. Well, of course, there are other simpler methods, not precise, but you're able to measure your biological age. Now, this biological age is the real indicator of the risk of infections and so on and so forth. So the other common term you'll hear is lifespan. Well, lifespan is more of a, how would you say, a statistical measure. That means an average time of how long a person, an individual, or an organism, to be more specific, is expected to live. In Malaysia, I'm sure you have better data. You've been following this conference, and people would have given you. But in average, it's about male is 76, about 76, and male is 74. in more developed countries is in their 80s. But what about other animals? Well, if we look at this slide in particular, for example, this ocean hog, you can live up to 400 years. What I find so interesting is it's a type of a clam, and some call it the immortal being in the sense that it can go up to about 800 years. There's some whales who can live for about 200 years, tortoise almost 200 years. I've not mentioned here mammalians. For example, elephant apparently you can live up to 200 years. So these are long living animals and long living organisms. In the early 1900s, there's this researcher called Alexis Carroll. Now, this person, well, we know now it's all by flawed experiments, showed that, organisms, this study was done in chickens, that these cells are able to divide continuously. So, meaning that, it has immortal property, but of course, this is now discarded, and we know that, the experiments were flawed. But what is the lifespan of humans? So, in average, if you read articles, a lot will tell you about 120 years. But this is based on Hayflick's, and it's known as Hayflick limit. Is that the maximum number of divisions a human cell can undergo before that's it? Then it just stops dividing. Senescence, remember earlier we spoke about? So by this calculation, it's about 115. So this is where you get the average life, where we can live up to 120 years. So now this is what is so interesting about it. Okay, so that's about aging. What about disease? Well, according to the WHO, a disease is any harmful deviation from the normal structural or functional state of an organism. It is generally associated with certain signs and symptoms and differing in nature from physical injury. A diseased organism commonly exhibits signs and symptoms indicative of an abnormal state. 80% of these diseases are actually as a result of the process of aging. That's interesting, isn't it? So we're looking at the diseases, and we're looking at what is the most common denominator that forms the risk. And you'll find that it is actually the whole process of aging. But what if the aging process itself, is a disease rather than something physiological? The WHO actually recently added an extension code in its latest version of ICT. There's a lot of controversy, and quite a number of researchers are unhappy about this. But however, um, for diseases which are aging related, and it defines this as those caused by pathological processes which persistently lead to the loss of organisms' adaptation and progress in older ages. But what about if aging is actually a disease? And what if there is actually no maximum human lifespan? Now, this is what is being proposed by Professor David A. Sinclair. He's the professor in the Department of Genetics and the co-director of the Paul F. Glenn Center for Biology of Aging Research at the Harvard Medical School. But he's not the only one, actually, although he's the most popular who believe this theory. Um, he has written a number of books, and he has written extensively and spoken extensively about this. Actually, this is where I've read and heard a few of his lectures, and I found very interesting. That got me reading more and more on this. Well, what he actually says is that the definition of aging and the definition of a disease only differs by the proportion of the population that gets it. Because interestingly, if it occurs in more than 50% of the population, then it is something that's natural. It's a natural phenomena. But if it happens less than 50% of the population, then it is labeled as a disease. So let's see what he has to say. Interestingly, he says that age limits the quality of life, results in physical decline, has a specific pathology. Aging fulfills the category of disease except that it occurs more than half the population. That's what I was telling you. So basically, you're saying is that the definition of aging and disease is almost the same, and what differentiate it is the proportion of the people that get it. And let's read what he says further. If a deterioration of the body occurs to less than half the population, it is called a disease. If it happens to more than half the population, we call it aging. So basically, we're saying is just the 50% cutoff. Now, it is this 50% cutoff that he says doesn't make sense. So whereas everything else fulfills the definition of disease, so why not aging itself? Now you'll have to do a lot of reading and listening to his lectures to really comprehend the whole complexity of what he's saying. But basically, is what he's saying is that aging is a process where there's loss of information. Now, information is stored as digital information, okay, in the genetic codes in the DNA, and then the epigenome or the analog codes are the ones that control the genes, which genes come on and which genes are off. It's just like a switch on and off. So what he says that if you can reverse this process of aging, you cannot get the information back as brand new as what it was, but the functionality is still there. And if you're able to remove the methylation in the epigenome, it is possible to rewind back the clock, if you may. Now, we spoke about senescence, so now we understand a bit better. Senescence is when the cells lose the ability to read their genes. Okay, so now in what he's suggesting is that there are 7 genes in our body that we have called the sirtuins, which are able to reduce intracellular oxidative stress. They improve mitochondrial function, and these are able to reverse cell senescence. He studied on rats which had damaged optic nerves, and using gene therapy, he was able to reverse this and basically making the optic nerves young again. And there were other studies as well showing that growth hormones are able to replace the thymus glands and reduce the biological age. And there are other studies on rodents, on brains and muscles, and showing very positive results. And there's so many actually other studies as well that are going on that are showing very promising results that suggest that what he's talking about could come out into fruition very near in the future. We spoke about sirtuins. The SIR in the sirtuins is for silent information regulators. Now, these are genes in the body which control health and age. Now, there's 7 of them in the body. What they do is they stabilize the epigenome. That means they tell the epigenome to reset the clock. And the study that he did on the mouse, was they reprogrammed 3 of these genes, and as I mentioned, they successfully were able to repair the damage of the optic nerve because of aging in this mouse. Well, no, it's really interesting, but there are others who feel that this will not work. Well, we talk about cells in general. Okay, we talk about the natural selection. Cells, two things will happen to cells. There are either they will senesce, they will stop dividing, or they will divide at a very, very rapid stage. And this is what forms tumors, cancers. Now, in the human body, there are about 26 trillion cells. And I like what I read in one of the journals where it's written that these cells are not working for you. They're not working for the organism. They're working for themselves. And as the whole process of the natural selection is they are competing among themselves. So two things will happen. Either they'll stop dividing or they might over divide and then form tumors. Now, the three genes that gave Yamanaka, which I call the Yamanaka factors, a Nobel Prize. Now, we find that they can wind back the age of organs and tissues, but the problem is that they cause tumors, the natural selection. Either they stop growing or they grow too fast, they multiply too much, and they become cancerous. Now, senescence reduces this proliferation of damaged cells. But if what would happen if you stop senescence? What would happen to the cells? Will they then start dividing very rapidly and then form tumors and cancers? Because, you know, according to science, only two things will happen. Either they will slow down and stop dividing, or they divide too fast. So these are people who have objections to, you know, stopping senescence. They're worried that what would happen if you stop senescence. Could it be that the cells then will be hyperactive and start dividing very actively to the extent where then you start developing tumors and you start developing cancers? So this is something that's a lot of discussion that's been going on this matter. I'm not a geneticist, neither a biologist, uh, but I find this topic very interesting. I've been reading quite a lot about it. Um, those who are for all this gene manipulation and others who are a bit concerned about it. So, of course, I can't summarize everything that I've read in this short time, but I think at this present time, if you were ask me to summarize, I would say that we can slow down aging, but at this present time, I don't think it is reversible, or at least it is not reversible without some dire consequences. But I do like what David Sinclair had written. He says that more than 80% of our future health will depend on our lifestyle, not on our DNA. And that is something which is different than what we've been told a lot, that it is your DNA, your genes that decide. I know the saying goes that you can run as much as you want, finally your gene is going to catch up with you. But looking at all the literature that is out there, there's a lot of your genes may be there on or off, and a lot of your environment, the lifestyle that we live, these are the ones that decide which genes you might have the gene, but they might not be on. They you just because you have the gene, that doesn't mean that you definitely get it. Something else, you got to trigger it, you got to switch it on, and a lot of that depends on our lifestyle. Right. So what can we do? There's so many things that we can do. Uh, what we know and what is affordable. Listen, it's going to take some time before results from all the studies are going to come back. It's going to be effective, and then it's going to be all this gene therapy. And how many of us can actually afford gene therapy? Let's be realistic about that one. So let's stick to what we know. Foods in high in antioxidants. So foods high in antioxidants, I was reading somewhere, Intense color fruits have high antioxidants, and you will know that a lot of our tropical fruits, actually, which are affordable and taste really wonderful, have high levels of antioxidants. Air pollution is something that we really need to avoid, and this is something that we need to push our government to encourage the use of electrical vehicles and discourage as much vehicles on the road as possible. There are proteins in our bodies naturally occurring. And of course, this was very interesting. I read this article on hyperbaric oxygen chambers shown to be very, very effective. But realistically, how many of us can afford oxygen chambers in our homes or get therapies for oxygen chambers? It's just not realistic, isn't it? Quit smoking, something so easily done, but yet we find people smoking. Although the rates may be dropping, but the number of people smoking are still very high. And what's sad is even healthcare professionals are smoking. Prevent sunburn. Again, I was reading somewhere that our DNA actually breaks and repairs a few thousand times every a day because of the exposure to the sun. Stress, mental stress, we cannot emphasize enough how we cope with stress, how we are able to overcome stress, and that goes even in our place of work. Government, Ministry of Health and healthcare professionals should come up with programs to reduce stress at work. This is extremely important. Exercise, of course, extremely important. It goes without saying. Now, fasting, especially the one that I've read on intermittent fasting, is amazing. It shows amazing results. I came to know about it a few years ago when a friend of mine was trying to lose weight and did intermittent fasting, and I saw the effect on this friend was amazing. Not only did she lose weight, but you can see that she was more vibrant and active after that. Intermittent fasting is easy, doesn't cost anything. If anything, it saves money, but you're not eating as much. And it's easily done. It's something that if you're not familiar with, it's something that you should look at. The other interesting thing was when I was reading one of the literatures from Professor David was what he is taking is this dietary supplement of nicotinamide mononucleotide. He's taking resveratrol. I'm not familiar with it, but I was reading a bit about it. It's an over-the-counter food supplement. However, if you are taking anticoagulants, you should be a bit careful with this. Again, I'm not familiar with it, but I've read a lot of positive findings about it, and especially from David Sinclair's literature on this one. So we come at the end of my talk. Thank you very, very much for listening. And again, I wish I was there. Not as much to answer questions, but wish we can have a dialogue, a discussion. As I said, I myself am not a subject expert on this, but it's something very fascinating which I've been reading about, and I think that it's really, really interesting. So that's all for me, and I've reached my almost 30 minutes allotted time. Thank you very much. Bye.